Now at 9, a nightmare in the air after a plane plunges and crashes into a South Florida condo. The pilot of that plane killed in the crash.
And examining the surveillance video, a high priority for the investigators. The video capturing the moments before this Piper PA banner plane crashed into a building on A1A, a block south of Oakland Park Boulevard. The plane took off from North Perry Airport Friday morning before making several passes along the beach.
Then was observed either by witness accounts making an abrupt right turn, flying in a westerly direction towards the building.
The sound came out of nowhere. The motor raced, and then you heard a hit. It was a big noise from him hitting the building.
It punched a hole into the 17th floor and crumbled onto an empty pool deck below.
Just crazy. If I was right there.
I said, oh my God, oh my God. When I look across, I saw the tail of the plane.
My first thought was to run.
Roger Miller hit hardest.
I was about to come around the corner into the kitchen, and that's when the crash happened.
A hole in his unit shows the initial impact. Damage and debris scattered across his kitchen, the small plane then tumbling 16 stories below.
This morning at 11:42, we received multiple 911 calls for an aircraft that had gone into the side of the building. At approximately 11:46, our first unit went arrival, indicating that they had an aircraft on the second floor, a possible banner plane. We had multiple reports of everything from the beach all the way to the intercoastal as the crash location. Upon arrival of the first unit, our first fire crew, the incident was at 3015 North Ocean Boulevard. It was a banner plane that had been going up and down the beach and had made contact with the building on the east side between the 16th and 17th floor.
Okay, so what considerations should our officers be thinking of prior to arrival with minimal information from dispatch?
So the initial minimal information we did get was that there were alert tones put out. The dispatcher did a good job, include everybody in that this was a high priority event, and suggested that there was some kind of a plane crash, possibly into a building in the area of Oakland Park Boulevard and A1A, somewhere between the ocean and the intercoastal. So that gave us kind of a large area to consider. Fortunately, Station 54's location was advantageous to us. Those initial responding personnel on Engine 54 are probably well aware of the fact that they're going to be going to work very quickly. So other than getting dressed and getting to the scene as quickly as possible, that kind of fills their time. As the incoming 1st Due Battalion Chief, I was at Sunrise and A1A, so fairly close to the incident in my territory. This is middle of the season with a lot of heavy traffic north and southbound A1A. Some of the things I was considering was accessibility, and especially my TRT team, which is Station 29, across the intercoastal. They were available. They weren't training at the time. So I asked dispatch to hold the Oakland Park Bridge to make sure I could get at least TRT over there, along with the other responding units that were primarily coming from the west. My first ladder was Ladder 35, and other responding engine companies, along with Engine 13, which was going to be behind me. So I think to get the scene started, you just need to think ahead a little bit and make sure you can get people there, free up the bridges, and get as much information back from dispatch as you can as the responding incident commander to try and come up with a game plan with regards to resources, and on an event like this, who else am I possibly going to need?
As Jason said, you didn't get an address up front, and then we started getting multiple calls, and the address became clear of what building it was. It's the Berkeley, and we're all pretty familiar with it. We run a lot of calls there. 54 is around the corner, worked in our favor. And, you already know what kind of building the Berkeley is. It's a residential high-rise, a lot of elderly folks. So those things have to play into your decision-making process when you're running a call like this. Unknowing to us, in a slide you'll see shortly, is that the building is completely under rehab, which didn't work in our favor either.
Okay, so what were some of the key considerations for you and your initial arriving units?
So one of the things I quickly noticed as I was coming northbound on A1A was that if a plane did impact the Berkeley, it certainly wasn't sticking out the side of the building because I couldn't see it from A1A. What came from Engine 54's size up and Captain Morissette was that the plane had struck the building, but it had landed on the pool deck, which, again, as Chief McLaughlin said, knowing this building, which most people do that have worked the beach, the pool deck is elevated about 15 feet above the first floor, which is primarily retail space, offices, and a walkway, like a breezeway, down into the lobby area. As was mentioned, it was under complete renovation, which meant that there was nobody out sunbathing. However, there were approximately 20 construction workers on the pool deck, working on the concrete and other parts of that renovation. So we had that to deal with. Access to that deck under renovation was also difficult. There was kind of a construction type staircase external on the north side of the structure to get you up those 15 to 20 feet over a small parapet and onto that pool deck. So I think primarily the initial concerns on arrival were what type of plane is it? How many people are involved in the incident? What hazards do I have initially? There was a large amount of aircraft fuel. It was a small aircraft, and there was only one occupant, the pilot, who unfortunately was deceased and pronounced Signal 7. However, initially, Engine 54 made the determination that there was a possibility of saving the pilot, and he was removed from the fuselage very quickly. However, on further evaluation, he became Signal 7. However, we were still dealing with the fuel, debris from the impact area, which was 16, 17 floors above the fuselage, and like we already mentioned, the difficult terrain to work on, which was a concrete deck that was under heavy renovation.
Just to touch on the size up, as Captain Morris went arrival, the only size up he can really give is of the building itself, because once again, as Jason said, you can't see the plane really other than a piece of the tail and the bright yellow coloring of it. And the size up is a process that is dynamic and does not stop throughout the incident. You're going to get progress reports, which is all part of your sizing up as the incident grows. And so until you get up on that pool deck, you're not really going to be able to tell exactly what you have. Until you get somebody up to 16 and 17, interior of the building, you're really not going to know what you have inside. The size up needs to be pertinent information, doesn't need to be long-winded, and basically what you have, what you're doing, and what you're going to need. And the chief officers that take command will fill in the blanks for you. But the first due officer, those three things, all the mnemonics are great. You're not going to have enough time to start filling out all those blanks. Those three things are the most vital information that you can give to incoming units to paint that picture as perfectly as you can.
And I think as a captain that frequently upgrades to a battalion chief and incident command of this incident, you quickly realize that for the first incoming company officer, Engine 54, Captain Morissette, they were being pulled in 10 different directions. They were having to try and locate where the fuselage was, how many people were involved, all the other hazards that were going on. But their primary focus, as it should have been, was to save life. So while they were completely focused in on attempting to save the pilot, there was obviously a lot of other information that we were waiting for. When I went arrival shortly after Engine 54, fortunately, because I happened to be on A1A, returning from another station, I was able to get up onto the pool deck and, like Chief McLaughlin said, grow on the size up a little bit and try and give more detailed information to the incoming units, i.e. the TRT team, the rescues that are coming in, the ladder truck that may need some information so that they can pick a better location to stage and operate the apparatus if needed. So all of those things had to be expanded on after that initial size up and that first crew kind of went to work immediately. And then the other thing on this incident is the expanse of the incident. So yes, it was a plane crash. However, The plane hit and dropped about 200 feet. The impact site was up on the 16th, 17th floor. Very fortunately for us and for everybody in the building, the main impact happened between the 16th and the 17th floor. So this was a small 25-foot Piper aircraft, very light, about 3,000 pounds. An F-150 is 4,000 pounds. So we know that a truck can go into a building and push into the living room. This light aircraft flying at about probably 80 miles an hour, 60 to 80 miles an hour, had more than enough potential to fully penetrate one of those apartments and possibly cause a high-rise structure fire. You can see the hole on top, which is the 17th floor. Half of the plane penetrated and actually knocked the dishwasher away from the wall, which we'll see in another picture. And then below that dividing line of solid concrete, which is the floor ceiling between 16 and 17, another attempt to penetrate into the building. So had the plane been 4 feet higher or lower, this could have been a completely different incident. So my initial size up on the scene when I arrived after Engine 54 had focused on trying to save the pilot, had now expanded into, we have a fuselage on the pool deck, we have debris, potential debris falling from the 16th, 17th floor, and we also have a third location, which was where the banner that the aircraft was pulling had actually been wrapped around power lines on the east side of A1A and 30th Street, where that also created a large hazard for us. So actually 3 different locations that needed attention, all coming out of this one incident.
And you started on to the next subject here, which was basically describing the hazards that were found on scene. So you mentioned the construction and the structural issues. What were some of the other hazards that you found on the scene?
So fuel was definitely a large concern of ours. If we go down to the area of the fuselage, this plane apparently carries about 150 gallons of fuel. That's a lot. Where it was actually in its flight pattern, we didn't know. However, you're going to assume that there's at least half a tank on board because they were flying north and we knew that they took off south. Therefore, it's at least 75 gallons of aviation fuel. That's a hazard for us, for exposure, for ignition, for all those purposes. So one of the first things that we had to consider after dealing with the pilot was how can we mitigate this initial hazard, which is the fuel. Absorbent was quickly considered, and then we moved on to a foam blanket, which we decided could be applied from street level. So that operation was put into plan, and I gave out assignments for the foam blanket. We also had the hazard, like I mentioned, of the large banner, which are for these banner planes. The banners they pull are about 40 by 100 feet. So something that size wrapping around live power lines in the residential neighborhood right across the street from us was an additional hazard that I assigned Engine 13 to. It's a 300-foot line that comes from behind the aircraft to the banner. So somewhere between the power lines and obviously the impact, we had this length of rope or cable that was separated from the plane when it made impact or just prior to. That was actually suspended over the top of a 4-story residential structure on 30th Street and A1A. And then right behind that, we had the banner wrapped around some live power lines. Unbeknownst to us, we actually had residents that were trying to pull the banner down to make access to their neighborhood, which, per FP&L that responded, obviously, was an extremely hazardous potential event where they got very lucky. So that could have been a whole nother incident by itself. But that was just the one area that you can see at the bottom of the slide where we have the banner arrow. So that was the incident where as the plane was flying north, the banner 300 feet behind the aircraft was lower than the aircraft, got wrapped around the power lines for whatever reason, engaged, snagged, and then separated from the plane. The plane then took a sharp turn to the left, which initially was described as possibly catching a gust of wind. It was clear afterwards that it was windy, but not that windy. But it was the banner getting caught in the power lines and then separating under tension that caused the plane to take a sharp turn to the left, nose up, tail down, and it made its way, almost clearing the building, unfortunately striking this, 19, 20-story structure on the 16th, 17th floor. And then dropping about 150 to 200 feet down onto that pool deck, which is where we found the fuselage. And then, Chief, you want to talk about the other bullets we have on there?
Yeah, so you can see where the plane was, and we were somewhat fortunate that since the building was under rehab, it created its own potential hazards, but it also eliminated the pool deck from having 20, 30, 40 people sunbathing on a very warm day in March when the hotels in the area and that building are full of snowbirds. And so that was out of play, which saved quite a few lives, and very fortunate for us. Once we got our bearings, and Jason and I decided to set up a more solid command post as the incident started to expand, we made the decision to put the command post in the lobby. PD was already in the lobby with a pseudo command post, and we decided to set up in there, which worked in our favor. We became a central point for everybody to check in. And then you can see the building to the west is the Tides, and there is a reciprocal agreement with them and the Berkeley, if they have an issue at either building, that they can seek refuge for their residents in the opposite building. So we made contact. Jason had the idea to see if we could get these people somewhere. They had an agreement in place. They contacted that person, and we were able to get 70 some odd people over to the Tides. As we said, it was a warm day, a lot of elderly folks, a lot of walkers, a lot of wheelchairs. We assigned a rescue to them specifically for those people. The chaplain was on scene. He went over there. He was a huge help. And some staff from our EMS bureau showed up, and they were able to be placed over there as well.
So we talked a little bit about evacuation, but I'm going to ask this again. So in regards to evacuation, is there anything that officers should be aware of when considering evacuating something as complex as a high-rise?
So initially, evacuation had started by a pool station based on the fact that a plane flew into the building. And we had an initial gathering on the south side of the structure, which we'd already mentioned. We already talked about the complexity of this incident specifically and how it grew from a plane crash into 3 different areas for attention: the banner wrapped around the power lines, the fuselage on the pool deck, and the debris and the structural damage on the 16th, 17th floor. So we very quickly realized, myself as a new incident commander on my first plane crash, that federal agencies were coming in. There needed to be a better scope of control, and logistically, we needed to prepare for this event to continue on for the next few hours. So by requesting more rescues, assisted by Chief McLaughlin, EMS leadership, and a whole nother kind of chain of command over at the evacuation staging area, we were able to separate that a little bit from the operational incident and kind of control feeding, fluids, medical assessment, and kind of taking care of everybody. And then I'll just touch real quickly on moving the command post to the lobby area, which was Chief McLaughlin's idea. The biggest benefit of that was, as this incident grew with federal agencies, building inspectors from the building, from the city, there were several different agencies that I've never had the experience of working with before. In having one central command post where the police also gathered their command, we were very easily able to send out messages through Firecom to stage meetings at that unified kind of command post where everybody could merge and share information on the integrity of the building, the evacuation, the status of the plane, incidents that I needed, the fire marshal, our building inspectors, our fire investigators, etc. And it just made everything run a lot smoother.
Just to dovetail on what Jason said, this is the textbook operation of a unified command presence. And PD was in the lobby, and they were at kind of the lobby control desk for the building. And we were originally going to set up there, and Jason's like, it's a little bit cluttered over here with people. Let's move it into this other little sitting area over here. And it was more like a kind of a waiting room lobby area. And it actually turned out to be the best location. And even the PD leadership kind of moved over to our area. And we use that as our central gathering point for information dispersal and information retrieval. We had Red Cross, and we had our medics that were checking in to go over to the tides came through there, and the chaplain came through there, and fire inspectors, fire marshal came through there. So we definitely had an area that was visible enough for us to know where we were, and secluded enough to where we could get our work done.
And comfortable to spend a few hours
yes,
there.
Definitely.
Kind of in control of, the medical examiner's office had to come and do body removal. So there were some other things that we haven't even really talked about that were going on at the same time. Work colleagues and friends of the pilot showed up, so we had to keep them separated from the medical examiner's office attempting to remove the body. So it's just so much easier to do that when you have a location that everybody recognizes, not just fire and police, but as I said before, FPL, NTSB, medical examiner's office, Red Cross, all of those agencies that we don't typically get to deal with on an average size incident. This was by far growing by the minute. And, that was the reason for kind of unifying everything into one location.
Okay. So, with the luxury of having an armchair and time to reflect after this incident, are there any lessons learned that should be passed along to our crew, specifically our officers?
So I think initially accessibility and the location of the incident we've talked about. I think a little bit of foresight with regards to we're all very well aware of how busy our city can be at certain times, and we know that the beach during the season is one of the busiest areas for traffic and access. So I think the foresight to get outside the box a little bit and think ahead, if possible, and hold some bridges and get other units started in a timely manner. We've already talked about the scope of the incident and the 3 different areas that needed attention, which was the 16th, 17th floor apartments that had damage, the fuselage on the pool deck, and the banner that was wrapped around the live power lines with rope and cable coming off of that. In hindsight, I think myself as the incident commander, I'd requested extra rescues initially because Rescue 54 was obviously going to work very quickly. Rescue 29 was responding as second due engine company, but obviously they have TRT responsibilities, which we needed for this incident, possibly. So we went ahead and activated a third rescue. Looking back now, I think that a couple of additional rescues right away would have assisted us. This came out initially as a fire-heavy kind of an alarm response, when the reality is, once we arrived, the incident that we were dispatched for had actually happened and was over. The plane had crashed. Unfortunately, the pilot didn't survive, and the damage was done. But what happened was it kind of morphed into a different type of an event where we ended up working with a lot of different agencies and managed a large evacuation into a different structure. And there are a lot more EMS responsibilities that we had to cater to. So I think additional rescues initially would have probably been more favorable. And then also something that I always try and do on any kind of a specialty scene or, a working operational structure fire, any kind of a hazardous event, is that there's always one additional rescue for our own people. We were working on a very unstable construction site, basically, for the initial attempted rescue of the pilot, and trying to negate the hazards like the fuel spill. So at any time, there could have been injuries to our own personnel. If all of your rescues are fully committed, then that's a delay in treatment that we could possibly avoid by always having, as Chief McLaughlin has said, always one additional rescue with 0 assignment, kind of as a backup for our own personnel, should we need it.
A couple of the things that I could say right off the bat is, this is obviously going to be as soon as you hear foam or a boat, some type of an incident like this that we don't get that often, be prepared to put a foam operation into practice. And the only way that we're going to get better with that is training on it. So that's definitely one thing on this event is foam. And then on the expanding size up and expanding scene as it unfolds, definitely don't be try to stay ahead of the game with the units and the resources that you have. Trying to get one more rescue there when you needed them there 5 minutes ago is not the easiest thing, because the first 4 first due rescues are already there. So now you're talking about coming from out of your district to grab rescues, which is they're not going to be there for a while. And the traffic is already a mess on A1A. And then the other thing is just don't be in a big rush for the first due company officers and the guys that are actors, because you could have very easily had an actor going to this as one of their first calls. And don't be in a rush to cancel the units you have responding when you get there and you realize that it's just a plane crash and the guy's at 7. And that's basically the incident is wrapped up, because as we learned real quick, this incident, unfortunately for the pilot, that part of the incident was wrapped up relatively quickly. And then the incident was 3 to 4 hours longer in evacuating people, the banner, waiting on the federal agencies to come and turn this into the crime scene that it became with a Signal 7 involved. So other than that, I think it for what we were dealt with, I think Jason did a great job, and I think all the units on scene performed very, very well under some somewhat adverse conditions and stuff that we don't get all the time. So
another thing I'll touch on too, on if we go all the way back to the beginning of this presentation and size up, which is one of obviously the most important things that we've already talked about. When you're responding to an incident that involves a foreign vessel, so anything other than our normal structure fire responses in the zones that we're all fairly familiar with, we're adding in this additional kind of foreign element, which is either a boat or a plane. For those people given the initial size up, obviously the first due crews are going to be very busy, and they're going to be focused on saving live property and keeping everybody safe that's working on the scene. But those second, third people arriving that can expand on the size up, like Chief McLaughlin said, and continue to grow the information for the incoming units, that has to be done, because you're trying to paint a picture in the mind of the responding units. And you're also trying to create a game plan where it can clue you into additional resources that are needed. The identification number on the aircraft was called into the local towers by me so that we could try and get some kind of a history on the plane. But I can tell you that with Google and with 10 seconds, you can very quickly find out that it's a Piper 25, it weighs 3,000 pounds, and it carries 150 gallons of fuel. That's very easy to do on scene while you're actually active and live on the incident. So there is a ton of information that you can get and pass on that becomes extremely beneficial to the driver engineer that's trying to flow foam for how much fuel, Chief? Well, they carry about 150 gallons. So all of that information with a little bit of time can be gathered fairly easily with today's technology. And as long as that information's passed on, then it just makes managing the incident a lot easier.
Well, this has been phenomenal. Thank you both for all the information, and I definitely think our officers will benefit from this information. Thank you both for this.
Thank you.
Thank you.